Politics Matters. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Today we're outside the Houses of Parliament and we bring to you every week Politics Matters, a 30-minute chat show with different politicians from different political parties. And today we're here to talk to Fabian Hamilton, an MP for 20 years in Leeds North East and also a shadow foreign minister. Keep watching and keep supporting KTV Sky 858. Politics Matters. Welcome to Politics Matters, a weekly programme where we interview different politicians for 30 minutes across a range of issues that matter to you. Today we're delighted to be interviewing Fabian Hamilton, who's been the Labour MP for Leeds North East for the last 20 years. He's currently the Shadow Foreign Office Minister. Politics Matters. Fabian, before you became an MP, I think you were a taxi driver for a year, then a graphic designer, finally before you joined Apple Computers. When did you decide you wanted to be an MP? And what advice would you give to others who are thinking of having a career in politics?
Well, probably when I was age 11, actually, because, excuse me, my late father was a Liberal candidate here in London. And in those days, the Liberals didn't get very far at all at anything. I think they had 6 MPs out of 600 and odd. And some of them were quite odd. But I spent many happy evenings touring the streets of Wandsworth in South London when I was aged 11, knocking on doors with them. And I thought, this is really interesting. People were very polite, they still are. People were very interested, they just didn't want to vote Liberal, they wanted to vote Labour or Conservative. But it gave me a taste for it, because I realised it wasn't just about the politics, it was about the people. It was about what they thought, what they were interested in, what they wanted to tell my dad about. So that's when it started. But the most important thing I think I can say to anybody listening is that if you have an interest in politics, it is vital to do something else first. If you want to be a member of Parliament or even a local authority councillor, do something else first. Because Parliament is greatly enhanced by the experiences of the people who come in aged maybe 35, 40, 45, 50, some even age 60, who've had a whole career, and they can then offer Parliament and the public and the people they represent something quite solid.
You have a passion for foreign affairs. You've served on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee for around 10 years. You're now a Shadow Foreign Minister. What's it about foreign affairs that particularly interests you?
Well, I think I probably have a missed vocation here as a diplomat. I've always thought that the key to peace in the world is understanding between nations and between peoples. And it's not just governments that are involved here, but I think diplomacy is the art of bringing people together. And the diplomats we employ in this country are amongst the most accomplished, the most professional, the most expert I've ever seen. Yeah. And I meet a lot of diplomats, as you can imagine, but other countries have fantastically good people representing their countries and making the people they interact with in the country to which they're posted feel warm towards their home nation, the nation they're representing. And it seems to me that foreign policy and foreign affairs is about peace, which is one of my roles on the front bench. It's about bringing people together and peoples together. It's about trying to ensure that conflicts that we've had sadly far too many of in the world today and in the past can become something in the past, something that we no longer have to worry about. Now, that's a very slim hope right now when we see what's going on. But we can never give up hope. And I believe that international relations and foreign affairs is about seeing what unites us, what can bring us together as human beings, not what separates us or casts us apart. And that's why I'm so dedicated to it. Now, of course, my background helps. You know, 3 of my grandparents were born abroad. My father was an immigrant to this country, couldn't speak English till he was 12 years old. And I have family in virtually every country in Europe, if not further afield. And that was a source of much amusement when I was on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and we'd go to, I don't know, say, a part of Africa or a part of Europe especially, and I'd say, oh, actually, I've got a cousin in that town or that city or that country or that part of the world, people used to find it really funny. Because English people aren't used to that, but I am, because I'm Jewish and Jews come from all over the world.
Because I know we've talked about Turkey.
Yes, we have.
And you've been heavily involved
Yes.
with Tibet as well.
Indeed, I don't have any family in Tibet, I have to say. I wish I did. I love the Tibetan people. But you're right, yes, Turkey, I do have family there.
Fabian, moving on to the Sikh community. In 2010, you kindly agreed to become the chair of the all-party parliamentary group for British Sikhs. You served in that role for 5 years. You have a close relationship with the Sikh community in Chapeltown in Leeds. How would you describe your relationship with the Sikh community and an interest in Sikh issues?
Well, I find it fascinating that actually the Sikh community in Leeds especially is so similar in many, many ways, not in the obvious ways, to the Jewish community. And I say that because it's not just the layers of immigration, the people that have come from countries where English isn't necessarily the first language, although obviously in India English is an important language. But the cultural values, the values of community, of family, and above all I think of education. And when I talk to my Sikh friends, I see in them the same values that I know the Jewish community shows. Now, the greatest moment in my political career was bringing a group of Sikh elders to meet Jewish elders in the Jewish Community Centre. And all the Jewish people stood up. They shook hands, they even hugged people they'd never met before. And they said, come and enjoy our food with us. And okay, the food's different, but it's a particular cuisine, just as Sikh cuisine is a particular cuisine. And of course, Jewish people, although they eat meat, are very happy to be vegetarian because the meat has to be kosher. And if it's not kosher prepared, they'll always eat vegetarian food. So there's so much commonality. But it is that application of hard work and self-improvement, as well as the benefit of wider society. And this is what I love, both in the Jewish community and the Sikh community. Not only do they care about their own background, faith, culture, and religious beliefs, but they care passionately about the people around them who may not be Jews or Sikhs. And so these are some of the things that the two communities share.
In January 2015, the Sikh community published the Sikh Manifesto. There are 10 issues in the Sikh Manifesto. Could I ask you about one or two of those issues in particular that many politicians sometimes try and duck? Firstly is the issue of the universal right to self-determination. Given this year marks the 70th anniversary of the independence of India and Pakistan, could you give your views about the right to self-determination, especially when it comes to the Sikhs?
Well, I think all peoples do. As you know, and you mentioned it earlier, I had a long involvement, as well as with the Sikh community, with the Tibetan community. Now, Tibetan community in the UK is very small, but the country of Tibet, which is occupied by China, but for centuries was an independent nation under the leadership of the religious leader, the Dalai Lama, the Buddhist religious leader, has a long and proud tradition. And I think all my Labour Party colleagues get very angry when we see people who have a common set of values or religious beliefs, a common way of living, being told you cannot exercise these freely. You have no right to do that. You must abide by what we tell you to do. Now, we've spent years, didn't we, decades, trying to stop the spread of communism. Why? Not because communism was a bad philosophy in itself. It's not. It's about sharing all the good things on earth between all of us equally. And I approve of that. It was the way it was implemented. It was the idea that a group of self-appointed leaders could say, you may not have a beard. That goes against what we think is the right way to look. You may not wear a turban because we think that is wrong and it shows a symbolism we don't agree with. Who are they? It's like monarchies in a way. Who are they to tell you, a fellow human being, what you can and can't do? And that's why self-determination is so important. Let's take a rather, I won't call it trivial, but an important case that affects this country, and that's of Gibraltar. Now, Gibraltar, most people don't know anything about Gibraltar. It's on the tip of Spain. It's a kind of anomalous British colony. but the Gibraltarian people who speak Spanish before English voted 15 years ago by 98.4% to remain part of Great Britain and to be allowed the right to govern themselves. Now, we're about to leave the European Union. There is no doubt in my mind that Spain will say once again, they're Spanish, it's part of Spain, we want them back. But the people of Gibraltar do not want to be Spanish. And yet, if we're not there in the European Union to balance the shouts and the cries of the Spanish, then they may well be forced to become Spanish. Is that not wrong? And so the same applies to the Sikh communities, the Sikh people of Punjab, to have their own nation, to determine how they want to live. And the same applies to the Palestinian people. I'm a Jew and I like the state of Israel a lot, but I do not like the way the Israelis oppress Palestinian people and stop them from expressing their self-determination.
Another issue in the manifesto, Fabian, is around the tragic events of 1984 and the associated gross violation of human rights. Do you think that the Sikh experience of the last 70 years, and particularly the experience since 1984, is that the case for the Sikhs' right to self-determination and independence is that much stronger?
Well, of course. I mean, I'm old enough to remember 1984. My daughter was born that year. I was 29. It really struck a chord in my conscious memory, that terrible assault on what we in Britain called the Golden Temple, of course. Sri Harminder Sahib. And I'll never forget that. I remember the anniversary, I think it was the 30th anniversary, was remembered. I think no, it must have been the 25th anniversary. It was remembered in Trafalgar Square, and I spoke at that huge rally at the time. And of course, when a state that does not comprise a certain religious or ethnic minority, as Sikhs are a minority, then decides that, sorry, you can't express the values or the beliefs or the religious system that you believe in, you're brought up in, and you passionately and sincerely and honestly believe. We will stop you through violent means. Well, something is clearly wrong. And I think that definitely points to the need for self-determination.
In the past, whenever the issue of 1984 has come up and human rights violations, we've come up against successive British governments who've been able to conveniently say this is an internal matter for India, especially given the colonial past. Do you think the inadvertent disclosure of papers in January 2014 under the 30-year rule completely changed that? And more recently, the papers we've discovered in August 2016 have highlighted that military advice was given within weeks of the attack on Sri Harminder Sahib, the Sikhs' holiest of holy places. Do you think that that means that the British government can no longer argue that this is a matter for India alone?
It's one thing for the British government to say, and I think quite rightly so, that we're the former colonial power, so we're the last people that should be advising the Indian government, and of course the Indian government takes the same view. I'm often asked by constituents of mine of Indian origin, they're British citizens, I own a piece of land in Punjab or in Pakistan or wherever it may be, certainly in India, there's local corruption, I want you as my MP to write to the local governor. And I said, listen, I can't. Firstly, I can't do that. Secondly, I won't do that. And when they say, why not? I say, because the last person you want interfering in the Indian legal system is a British Member of Parliament. And if you're concerned about something like that, go to the European Union, go to the Court of Human Rights, or approach the Indian authorities direct, but don't come to me about it. And of course, they're quite disappointed. But I think once it was revealed in 2014, the role that the British government at the time had played, then of course that blows out of the water any pretense that the United Kingdom had nothing to do with the attack, was completely clear of it. It was an internal matter for the Indian government of the day. And that's so clearly untrue, and I think it's tragic, actually.
Fabian, you'll remember there was much publicity when Narendra Modi came here in November 2015. And the day he arrived, there was talk of he had on his agenda, talking to David Cameron, the issue of Sikhs and a dossier relating to Sikhs, which supposedly named Sikh Gurdwaras in Birmingham and in Glasgow, named Sikh organisations, named individuals. And one of those individuals, weeks later, was picked up in Portugal, and India tried its best to have him deported, but they failed. I remember you asked parliamentary questions on the dossier in January 2016, and the government denied the existence of a dossier. However, you've been 10 years on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. You have a passion for foreign affairs. You're currently a shadow foreign minister. Do you think it's naive of people to think that some sort of dossier, some sort of information isn't exchanged?
I'm sure it does, and I hope your name isn't on it, but the problem is ever proving it. If they deny that such a dossier ever existed, I think it's going to be another 30 years before we find out, and that is tragic. But that is the fact. I think no amount of parliamentary questions and debates will reveal it if they're determined to keep it a secret, and they will.
Fabian, it's interesting, you mentioned that I may not be, you hope that I may not be within some sort of list produced by India, but actually only a couple of months ago in January 2017 was the headline on the front page of an Indian paper which said that UK-India relations were at stake because of me. And actually what that exposed more than anything was how the Indian government over a period of many years had been lobbying MI5, the Cabinet Office, my employers and others here to say, please stop him from partaking in activities that were exposing India.
But, well, I'm sorry to hear that, Davinderjit. I'm very, very glad that our system is robust enough and tough enough to say it's none of your business. But imagine had it been the other way around. Imagine the British government approaching the Indian government and saying there are certain individuals we think are a threat to Great Britain who live in, I don't know, Amritsar or Delhi. What do you think their response would have been? It would have been, it's none of your business, go away. How dare you say that to us? And the British Foreign Office, and I'm having problems with this at the moment because we've got a number of high-profile cases of British citizens in jail, for example, I dare say in India, but certainly in Iran. And the response of the Foreign Office and its ministers is this: these are sovereign states. We may not and cannot interfere in their legal systems. If they have, through due process, convicted somebody, then we have to abide by that, even though our consular services will argue for the release of that individual because they're British citizens. And that is, to some extent, a correct way to do it. I don't think the Americans would be quite as laid back about it, but the idea that we would accede to any demands from the Indian government is deeply offensive, just as it would be to the Indian government.
Fabian, we're coming to the end of the interview. In July last year, you resigned, saying you were troubled by Jeremy Corbyn's response to the Chakrabarti inquiry into anti-Semitism. As a prominent member of the British Jewish community, do you still have concerns about anti-Semitism in politics?
I think it's a problem in the whole of society, I'm afraid, amongst a very tiny minority. I don't think it's limited to the left of British politics or even to the right of British politics. I think there is a sense in which there is resentment of Jewish people or people who look outwardly Jewish in some way. Now, because we live in a much more multicultural society than we did when I was a child, if you're a Jew, it's harder to pick you out. But I can tell you that when I was 9 years old and I went to my boarding school, which I didn't want to go to, the first comment that was made to me by a blue-eyed, fair-haired young boy was, "Which part of India do you come from?" I didn't know where India was when I was 9 years old. Now, that's far less likely now because we're much more diverse. But I think there still is a problem, and it's discrimination against anybody who appears to be different. And there is a high level of bitterness and anger towards the Jewish people.
Fabian, there's no denying there's anti-Semitism in British political life. But given there are no Sikh MPs and only 3 Sikh lords, none of those lords are from the Labour Party, compared to nearly 50 Jewish MPs and lords, despite Sikhs having 3 times the population. Do you think discrimination against Sikhs is stopping Sikhs from entering politics?
Yes, I do. And I think in my 20 years in this place, we've moved slowly and inexorably towards that goal, but we're not there yet. We don't have 50% women for a start. But I really regret the lack of any Sikh representation. We have had Sikh or MPs of Sikh origin here, Parmjit Danda, for example. But it's about time we stimulated our community. They have got so much to offer us. And Sikh men and Sikh women who are outstanding in the service they perform to their community, to their families, to their society, and to the cities and towns they live in. Let's have people coming forward. It's not a frightening thing to do. I would rejoice even if that Sikh MP was in the Conservative Party. I would rejoice. We must have that representation here. And when I was a councillor in Leeds from 1987 to 1997, I was always saying to the Sikh community, please, you've got a lot to say. You've got a lot to help us with and a lot to educate us with. Come and join us. Be part of that decision making and make sure that you have a voice in the decisions of Parliament and government that affect you as well as wider society. And then you really will have a voice. Please, anybody that's listening that's at all interested in politics from the left to the right, come and join us. Stand for a candidacy, stand for Parliament or your local authority.
Fabian, it's been a privilege to work with you over the years and currently work with you on a number of issues that matter to the Sikh community. And one day we hope to have fair representation in Parliament and to see around 20 Sikh MPs and Lords. So Parliament reflects our population in this country. Keep watching and supporting KTV, Sky 858. Politics matters. It's about you and your lives and the issues that matter to you. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Politics matters.